Hello, everyone, and welcome. You are on NCST's monthly community impact briefing call. We're going to get started here in 2 to 3 minutes. We're just letting people join. We're going to go ahead and give folks just a couple more minutes to join. Thank you for being on. We'll give folks one more minute here. I do still see that folks are jumping on. Looks like attendees have slowed. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to NCST's May Community Impact Briefing. My name is Erin Persons, and on behalf of my colleagues at the National Community Stabilization Trust, we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. Today we have a great agenda, including a fabulous guest speaker that's going to talk a little bit about some technology tools, which for those of you that know me know that that's one of my favorite things. And then we also have our policy update from our president, Julia Gordon. As a reminder, everyone is on mute. You will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide feedback throughout the call, either by using the chat feature or the Q&A. With that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Don Stockmo, to introduce our presenter for today. Don?
Great. Thanks, Erin. I'm going to take this opportunity as the person introducing Peter Haas just to reiterate something that I'm sure we are all aware of, namely we have a housing and a climate crisis. That being said, we can also be part of the solution. Increasingly, experts see a collective threat to the US economy as the risks of owning a home in places affected by climate change stack up. Economists and policymakers say climate-induced flight from threatened areas could shock the US economy as home prices plummet. Lending dries up and the local tax base diminishes in hard-hit regions. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said climate change poses, quote, an existential threat to the financial system and created a climate hub at her department. Even the Ford F-150 is all electric. That was announced this morning. We are all housing developers and in some cases homeowners, advocates, and policy folks, and we can be part of the solution. Today, Peter will describe the Green Values Calculator and give us some breaking news, or as he calls it, initial proof of concept findings related to it. While there are many interventions out there, this is one you may not be aware of. And because it looks at costs and return on investment, we thought it'd be interesting for you all to be introduced to it. Peter Haas has worked for the Center for Neighborhood Technology here in Chicago since 1994. He is probably most well known for his work in creating the Housing Plus Transportation Index, which has really become the industry standard when talking about housing affordability. I also just learned he is on the Technical Advisory Committee for AARP's Livability Index. And he still finds time to play the piano and the fiddle. Peter has a PhD in particle physics from Ohio State University. And I will leave you with one quote that is attributed to Chief Seattle and others. "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." So with that, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Dawn. Quite a introduction. I'm going to share my screen here and walk through a PowerPoint. I hope everybody can see my screen okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a calculator that we've developed and some background behind that calculator, looking at green stormwater infrastructure, how it gets implemented, and and how it changes the value of real estate in a neighborhood. Some pretty recent work. So just a second on what C&T is. We're the Center for Neighborhood Technology. We're based in Chicago. We work nationally, but really use Chicago as sort of our jumping off point, and doing a lot of grassroots stuff here, or working with grassroots agency. We're not exactly a community-based organization, but we support community-based organizations and work closely with them in Chicago and elsewhere. Working on making sure that neighborhoods are equitable, sustainable, and resilient to all climate change, as well as other issues. So today I want to talk a little bit about what's urban flooding and what's green infrastructure, just so we set the stage. Talk a little bit about a project that we've just released, this tool that Dawn mentioned, the Green Values tool. It's actually a re-release. We developed this in the early 2010s for the US EPA, but we've taken it to be a little bit more modern and a little more user-friendly and more up to date. So talk about the research that we've done on looking at the relationship between green infrastructure, GSIs, and housing value, and then run a what-if scenario on a neighborhood. And this is the proof of concept that Dawn mentioned. And then we'll have question and answers. Let me just start off with what's urban flooding. Well, it's not rivers overflowing and coming in through the front door. What we're really looking at is that, well, here's FEMA's definition of it, is, as we build and develop communities and we less and less pervious surfaces, we see that flooding happens, and you can see this all the time in any urban area. Viaducts in Chicago will routinely flood over and prevent people from getting around. People's basements flood because of sewage backups, but also because of inundation from yards. And so all of that causes costs, and what we'd like to try to do is to mitigate that and do that in a natural way. Sometimes we talk about gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure. Gray infrastructure being pipes and pumps and sewage treatment and all of that. Whereas green infrastructure, the idea is to keep the rain where it falls, let the landscape absorb those raindrops or store them for later use. And just to sort of make my point a little better, that it's a different phenomenon than you might think of. This is actually a neighborhood that you're seeing that's been flooded. This was a report we released back in 2014 where we got actual insurance data from private insurance companies. We looked at where payouts for flood damage was. And what we found, and I've crossed it out at the bottom, is it doesn't just happen. In fact, it doesn't predominantly happen in the floodplains that FEMA requires protection against. So we looked at flood insurance claims, and we saw that you know, over the Chicago, Cook County, 97% of the zip codes had claims. So it isn't just overflows. And you can see that this is real money. Almost $750 million was paid out in the 4 years that we looked at this report. And you can get this report on our webpage if you want to really dive into this a little bit more. So what is green infrastructure? So well, it's people using the landscape, like I say, to absorb the raindrops, to put it into use either for your garden or keep it out of the sewer system. Most Midwestern cities in particular have what's called a combined sewer system. So the stormwater comes off of the streets and the pavement and maybe yards and things. And that gets combined with the sanitary, the sewage from your house, the toilets and your showers and your sinks. That gets combined. Some cities, more recently developed cities, say Los Angeles, and I think Los Angeles is one, they have separate stormwater and sewage system and sanitary sewage systems. But most of the Midwest has the combined. So that's a thing to think of, and the East Coast too. Although there are suburbs in Chicago where they have storm sewers and sanitary sewers that are separate. So it's not one size fits all. But so I just make that point because what happens during a storm, all that storm water goes into the sewage system. It gets combined. All that water that is, you know, essentially clean water from rain has to be treated just as if it was sewage. So that's a cost on society as well as individual homeowners. Well, so let's look at some examples. You know, this is a green roof in the upper left right-hand corner. That's actually on the Peggy Notabart Nature Museum in Chicago here. And you can see what the idea there is you plant green stuff on your roof that absorbs the rainwater, and then it also helps cool the building. A rain gardens is a typical thing in the lower right-hand corner. Is a little swale you put in your yard. Plant plants in there that are able to live in both dry and wet communities, and route your downspouts into that. So on a big rain, it holds the water and then slowly gets absorbed. And then there's rain barrels and cisterns. Other examples are to use your landscape is you know to put native vegetation. Trees are a great way to absorb rainwater during the storm events. And you know, there's paved surfaces that you can't really do much about, although what is known as parking lot swales, you've seen this, I think, in certain places where people will take part of the parking lot and open it up and allow rainwater to go into that rather than down the drain. And of course, permeable pavement, either pavers or there's permeable concrete people use for paving as well. Anyway, so those are just some examples. Now I want to talk about what we've just been doing, looking at green stormwater infrastructure and property values, and then see how that cost benefit analysis works out. So we were funded by the Kresge Foundation. We went about looking at sales in the last several years. Now I'll get a little bit more into the methodology. I won't go too deep into that. And we noticed that well, several cities have to do something about their CSOs, combined sewage overflows is an issue. And there's been consent decrees of cities all over the Midwest and the East Coast, and I think in the West as well. But like, you know, Cleveland, Detroit, Philadelphia, I guess Seattle is another one, Milwaukee, all have consent decrees where a judge says you have to contain that, you have to stop your combined sewage overflows. And part of the solution for all of those places has been to look at the landscape and how we could use that better. So what we're kind of concerned with is if we do all of this green infrastructure in low income communities, is our property values going to go up so much that it's going to create some displacement risks, or is it just going to add to the value of the neighborhood? And well, we'll get into that a little bit more what we found. So to do this, we looked at 3 different cities: Philadelphia, Seattle, Milwaukee, and We ended up not using Milwaukee because their data was good, but it was so different than the other two cities in terms of what implementation of green infrastructure and how they expressed it. We had a hard time doing the statistical analysis. So what I'm going to show you is results from Seattle and Philadelphia. Here's a driveway in Seattle that's been permeable paved, and this actually is a Milwaukee. You can see a large swale and rain gardens and trees that have been planted in order to contain stormwater up in Milwaukee. But what we did is we look at where the implementation of this green infrastructure was, and then run a regression model against property values and controlling for lots of things. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. So there's property characteristics, the usual thing that you think about when you think about real estate, how many bedrooms, what square foot, presence of garages and fireplaces and things like that. But then there's also neighborhood characteristics. Is this a neighborhood where there's a higher income, more people, higher, better educated, and then also the tenure. Is it more owner occupied or renter occupied? We also looked at some local assets. Are you near, transit? Are you near the lake or the ocean, as in Philadelphia? These are actually images of Philadelphia. And public parks. And we know that those all add value to this. So we controlled for that and then looked at the green infrastructure that was in place. So here's some shots of green infrastructure in Philadelphia. You can see different types of implementation. And then what we did is we put a 250 feet buffer around that. And we looked at properties that were sold in that 250 foot buffer, and then controlled for those other variables, and then looked to see if there was a difference in the sales before, after, but also spatially. I talked about a lot of different types of green infrastructure there. We have rain gardens and swales and bump out and permeable pavement and all that stuff. What we ended up doing is grouping them into 4 different categories, plus trees, which we did not try to value. There's been so much work done on the value of trees. The U.S. Forest Service has this iTree, which you can go in and you can put your trees in. I've done it on my property. Put my big walnut that kills all our tomato plants, and saw what the value of that is, to convince my wife that we should keep it, even though it attracts squirrels. But we have, so we did not try to do the tree value, but we're looking at rain gardens, things that absorb, bigger implementations like that thing I showed in Milwaukee, where there's pervious pavement, and then where we collect water off the roof, either the green roofs or the rain barrels and cisterns, and then we match those to properties, and like it says, and looked at regression analysis. So here's a little bit of how that worked. I'm not going to get too detailed into this, but I would say I just want to thank our friends at SB Friedman and Associates, consulting, real estate consulting firm, that helped us do this regression analysis. And I'll allude to them in a bit, and you can hear directly from them on a video that I'll share. Yeah, so the home value, like I said, is a function of the property characteristics, the neighborhood characteristics, the spatial amenities, parks, waterways, transit, and how much green infrastructure has been built. So let's just cut to the chase and get to what we found. Well, we found that if and when you implement these rain gardens and planters and swales, they actually do enhance the real estate value. Not a lot, fractions of percent, and it can get up to a couple percent. And I'll show a more detailed chart of this in a second. But what does this mean for a homeowner with a $250,000 house that wants to put it for sale, and there's no green infrastructure versus there is some? Well, you could see, almost $1,000 worth of value. So it's not going to make or break your pocketbook, but it's going to enhance the neighborhood. This is all in a report that you can see on our website, that co-authored by C&T and SB Friedman, looking detailed into all the process that we went through to generate this model. Here is just a set of tables from that report. Probably too much information throw in here, but I just wanted to show that, when we control for different sort of neighborhood variables, so the model is sort of too complicated to do all three of these: education, poverty, and home ownership within the same model. So we sort of broke it up and did 3 models. You can see that sometimes things aren't statistically significant, like in Philadelphia, we see rain gardens don't really have, but we see in Seattle, they're actually a substantial 2.8% increase, given that there's rain gardens or swales nearby. And kind of conversely, we saw that wetlands and basins and trenches which were more prevalently used in Philadelphia than in Seattle, and that's probably why it's more statistically significant. Pervious pavement, again, adds value. What we did find, and we ended up not using this because we think what's going on with the green roofs and the cisterns is it actually detracted from the value. And what we think that is in Philadelphia anyways, what we think that's related to is where they implemented the green roofs and their cisterns in Philadelphia. We're really in commercial and industrial areas. We're not really sure what that's about. As all good research has, this merits more research. So we go out and get more funding and dive into that more. And I laugh, but I think I'm serious that this is something that we need to dive into more. But what we showed is that, the sort of more concept, the thing that you think of when you think of stormwater green infrastructure, if you think about it, the things like, rain gardens and swales and planters and permeable pavement, etc. So you can see that it breaks out different. You can, if you have just one bayou, let's look at rain gardens in Seattle. It really almost is 3% increase in the price. By adding another one, it incrementally increases, but not at as big a range. And if you double the size, you also see an increase. So how would we ever use all of this stuff? Well, we think that there's some value in this by looking at how communities could use it to incent owners and renters and landlords and community memberships to start implementing this. It will add value to the local neighborhood. And so we created a tool, Green Values tool, which I'll show in a second. And then work that we're doing right now that I'm going to show in a little bit, that very preliminary, as I like. It's before preliminary, so I call it a proof of concept. And I'll show a neighborhood in Buffalo how this would play out. So let's just quickly click to the Green Values calculator. So you can go to greenvalues.cnt.org and you can play around with it, and I encourage you to. And also there's a video that we did back in, I guess that was in February, that Dawn and others saw and we released. And when I send this PowerPoint through, you can click on that and go to it. But let me just click on the Green Values calculator. Actually, what I'll just do is bring up my browser. And let me see Zoom. So here's the Green Values calculator. And the idea behind the Green Values calculator is that you can go through and you build a scenario. So I got an urban lot, it's about 600 feet, and you edit this and build how this all works. And I encourage you to watch the video because it's a little complicated and we don't have time to go through every detail. And then you add, so this is kind of my house. I got a house, I got a garage, I got a walk on the side. Plus I have flower beds in the backyard. And so I can add some green improvements to that. I set a goal of that I want to try to be able to capture at least a half an inch of rain that would rain on my roof, my sidewalks, and my garage. So I say, in that scenario, I said, well, what if I build 100 square foot, a 10 by 10 foot rain garden in my backyard? Would that meet the goal? And the answer is yes, it would over meet the goal, 107% of that goal. So that's great. So this shows how easy it is to get this to work. What's the value of that? Well, it's really not that high a value in terms of the things that it does, in terms of both ownership value, which this doesn't do a whole lot other than it makes it nicer. But it does help reduce, sort of MWRD's ability to treat water, the Metropolitan Chicago water treatment people. They have to treat a little less water, saves me money, saves everybody money. We do both a life cycle cost and annual benefits estimate. But more importantly, I think for this discussion is what does it do to my real estate value? Well, there's that 2.8% that I talked about. So it by doing this, it enhances the value of my property. The one thing that's not on here that really needs to be, and again, this is the merits more research, is I remember in the beginning I talked about how this and how your urban flooding can affect my property. Well, it could come, and it has backed up, flooded my basement. Doesn't anymore because of things I've done. But what's the cost of that? Well, it's hard to estimate that cost ubiquitously. I don't know. And does this does catching that 1/2 inch rain actually prevent the flooding? Well, probably does. But so that's the real benefit, and we can't do that. And so I would encourage people who wants to dig into this a little bit more to read another study that we've done and released on our website, and you can link to all this on CNT's website. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. So the next thing I want to do is I would just say that Kresge followed up with their funding on the research, and they said, well, why don't you dig into 3 cities and look at how green infrastructure is getting implemented in those 3 cities, and take a look at how that would change real estate costs. Is that going to incent some displacement or not? And we're just getting started in this project, so this is preliminary, and take this all with a grain of salt. But we picked our 3 communities, Milwaukee, Buffalo, New York, and New Orleans. We've got data in Milwaukee and Buffalo, and we're still working out getting data from New Orleans, but it's coming along. So, but I'm just going to pick a neighborhood in Buffalo. This is a neighborhood called Broadway Fillmore. It's sort of a lowish income neighborhood. Broadway's is east-west street, Fillmore is a north-south street. You can see there's the land use here shows those are commercial corridors. This is the Amtrak station down here, and there's a beautiful old Art Deco. If you've ever been to Buffalo, it's a cool building. But you can see all the vacant land in that. The black represents vacant parcels that where disinvestment has gone into this previously residential neighborhood. Here's all my proposals, so don't take this with a big grain of salt. So this is just a proof of concept. This is not real or even a planned scenario, but it's just to say what happens if I put 1,000 square foot of rain garden, like I did. Well, I put 100 square feet in my property, in some selected vacant, some of those selected vacant parcels around the neighborhood, and then apply the formula that we just derived, and then see how that affects the neighborhood. So first of all, I need to figure out what's the value of the neighborhood. So I went in, and Buffalo has a great database portal that we can get down parcel data, and it has last sale, and it has assessed values from the Erie County assessor. So the left-hand map is the neighborhood with only residential properties sales that happen to have happened since the year 2000, which I probably shouldn't have gone back that far. Now, but again, this is all preliminary. Probably should have stuck after the big the Great Recession of 2007, 2008. Probably got stuff in after that. But anyways, I took the sale price that they indicated and the year of sale, and I used an inflation calculator and calculated that up to $21. And so you can see that this is not a high-end neighborhood. Most of the prices are, hardly anything of it is above 100,000. If anything, you can sort of see this crescent on the west hand, the west end of the neighborhood is a little higher value than central and eastern part of the neighborhood. I would just say that downtown Buffalo is about a 1.5 miles to the west, following Broadway downtown, right? Goes right to City Hall. So, and then on the right-hand map, you can see the assessed values. And again, You know, as I'm sure you're all aware that assessed values and market values are related, but not perfect. So I couldn't help myself. I every time I do a PowerPoint, I have to have at least one graph with a regression analysis in it. Comes with a PhD in physics, I guess. So here's the assessor value on the x-axis and the inflated sale price that I calculated on the y-axis, and you can see there's a fairly close rejection correlation, r squared of 51%. So it's better than a coin flip that I can call this, but you can see it's a pretty strong relationship. So I use this formula to estimate what the predicted prices will be, given that formula, and I'll show that in a minute for all parcels, whether there's been a sale or not. But now let's think about where we would want to build our green infrastructure. And the sewer district in Buffalo has created a program they call the Green Demolition, where they go and they look for blighted properties. They remove the if there's any structure, and then they sort of rehab the soil and create a vacant lot that is good. And they don't put any effort into, like, building any gardens or rain gardens or swales or anything on these things. So my scenario that I'm just making up is, what if I took all of those green demolition areas, put 1,000 square foot of rain garden in each one? How would that change the value of the neighborhood? Well, so I took my formula and I applied them to all of those parcels in the neighborhood that were within 250 feet of this, plus the ones that weren't. And you can see there's no increase in those neighborhoods, or those parcels in that part of the neighborhood. So how does this play out locally or globally in the neighborhood? Well, here's my predicted sale price before we added those green infrastructure value. And here it is after. You didn't see a lot of change. Well, I'll just do that again. I'll back up. So here's what it is. Look at that one parcel there. That's about the only one that really changes colors in the division of colors that I made. So while it enhances the neighborhood, and you can see I might have a funny wrap there, but without the green infrastructure, it's worth all the real estate in this neighborhood, $93 million. If I added when I add the green infrastructure, it goes up to 94 and change, or it's almost 94, and it starts off and it goes up to 94 and a half. So that's a 7% increase over the whole neighborhood of value across the neighborhood, or almost $250,000. So in a low income community where houses sell for less than $100,000, that's an appreciable enhancement to the value of the neighborhood. But we might look at that. There is this trend on the western side that prices are higher and they're going up more. So that's about as far as we've taken this. So I think that it shows that while the green infrastructure adds value to the neighborhood, I think it's going to enhance the ability to develop in a neighborhood in a more sound way. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Open it up for questions, discussions, and I'll keep sharing my screen, I guess. And we'll see where we go from there. Erin, you want to?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. I'll be honest, all I could think of right now was the times that my basement has flooded and how I can create a rain garden to stop that from happening in the future. So I'll be doing some research both on your site and on my own here to try and figure that out. At this point, we'll go ahead and take some questions. And you can either use the Q&A feature or the chat feature. If you've got questions or comments for Peter, we'll take those. Lots of information.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to go ahead and try to get into it. Like, if you want to build a rain garden,
right?
We in our green values calculator, we sort of estimate the price, but it's we try to do this at a national scale. And as anyone knows who's ever built anything, you get 2 contractors, you get 3 prices, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've got some plug numbers in there, but part of the the development of the calculator was to make sure that you could adjust all of that stuff.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And just so everyone knows, Peter's presentation will be up on our website most likely tomorrow, along with a copy of this webinar, so that folks can go back and do some additional research on their own. And my guess is that people are overwhelmed right now with all of the good information and don't have any questions, but definitely appreciate your time. Oh, I see something here. Oh, this is interesting. So rain garden on a roof, concerning to folks. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Right. So I might just bring up the green values thing and talk about so green roofs. I don't know if you've heard, this is a movement that started in Europe. Actually, it goes way back. There used to be houses in Germany and stuff where they would graze goats on the roof of their houses. But in Europe, there was a development of the concept of putting a green roof. I might just go to, I can open up a little blurb on green roof. And there's that picture from taking note of our museum again. So what the idea is that, you know, you've got to have a roof that has the structural integrity to hold some soil. Usually you use like an aggregate. It's not exactly, and you use a tough plant. So this is sedum, which is designed to be able to handle the heat of summer on a roof. We all know how hot that can get, but also be able to absorb the water and be able to deal with that water. And that evapotranspiration, as they call it, that helps cool the building too. It lowers your heating and cooling costs in the cooling in the summer and heating in the winter. So a really good example of this, and I don't have the numbers on my fingertips, but Cook County, the Cook County courthouse, or not its courthouse, but the Cook County offices are in the same building as Chicago City Hall. And Chicago City Hall put a green roof on top of their roof. And you should see pictures of it. It's really amazing. There's beehives, and former Mayor Richard M. Daley liked these concepts and really promoted that. What people found is that when they did that you could actually see the difference in heating and cooling costs on the Chicago side versus the Cook County side that didn't put a green roof. And people have done infrared images of the roof in the summer, and you can really see the differences in temperature across those two things. So they're good. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's I was one more thing about the green roof concept. It's kind of expensive. I mean, as I think the questioner is alluding to, is how, you know, do you need a strong, well, you have to have structural integrity enough to put the aggregate and the plants up there and be able to hold that water. And so it's kind of expensive. And so maybe it's not a solution for a neighborhood like where I live, where we have a backyard that we could put a green, a rain garden in. But in a downtown area, it's really smart, where everything is paved and there's no place to really route that water off of those roofs. If you can keep the water on the roofs, it works out really well.
Yeah, that's great. And I see folks with similar questions to my own as I think about putting something growing on my roof, and I think of the leaks that can happen now. But potential increase in insurance costs on properties with green roofs is kind of that first question. And the second one is, and this makes complete sense, weight of the roof, if you're adding water and soil and plants, certainly becomes greater than just shingles. So can you talk to both of those questions?
Well, I can't really talk to the insurance. I don't know because there's a little bit of a give and a take.
Sure.
You're less likely to flood and things like that. So there is advantages,
of course,
from an insurance underwriter's point of view. But the structural integrity is an important issue. And so, you just want to go out to your garage and plant a garden up there and take a ton of soil and put it up there. You need to think of this through. And that's why it can get pricey. Because then if you do have to upgrade your structural integrity of your building. So, but I had some really nice pictures. There's where people actually have grass growing up and large plantings on people's roofs and how that absorbs. But in lieu of that, if you really just want to route your water, that's where you disconnect your downspout and route it into a cistern, a rain barrel, or a rain garden, or even a dry well, if you're familiar with that. A dry well is something you bury in your yard, route your water into that. It collects the water and then lets it soak back into the soil and recharge the aquifer. So, so there's lots of alternatives, and we try to lay those all out here in the tool. And everywhere there's something like here's an image of that dry well and an explanation. So you can go through that. I might just say, if I was to say, you know what, excuse me, I have a flat roof garage that's 400 square feet. Well, first of all, if I put 400 square feet, it doesn't even quite solve my problem, but it's $10,000, almost $11,000 at our going rate. And if I did that rain garden, it's $1,400. So like I say, it's probably not the best solution for a neighborhood situation, or well, definitely not a suburban situation or even a rural, but in a downtown area where there's density and not much not much permeable surfaces, it's a solution.
Right. And, Michael Roberts makes a really good point here. Although 7% doesn't seem like a lot in theory, LMI neighborhoods, you're absolutely right, Michael. That is a huge change and can change trends. And there's certainly the keeping up with the Joneses, where neighbors definitely do tend to follow other neighbors when something looks nice. And it looks like there are a lot of great options here. So I know I'll be researching them for my own home. I'm sure it goes without saying, don't try this at home without a professional. Don't just start putting things on your roof or things in your yard without doing some research. But I think this is great. And thank you so much for your time today and your presentation. Very informative.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I hope this is a good conversation that we can all use. So thanks.
Wonderful.
I'll stop sharing and let you take over.
Perfect. Well, at this point, I would like to introduce our president, Julia Gordon, to talk through some policy updates for today. Julia?
Thanks, Erin. And Peter, thank you so much for that presentation. Short policy update today because I don't think a whole lot has changed since last month. So a few things I want to report on. The first, I know everybody is waiting to know more about moratoria, foreclosure moratoria. I think folks were aware that the CFPB had issued a proposed rule that would create a pre-foreclosure review period, kind of essentially a moratorium, through December 31st. The comment period for that has closed now. And we expect the CFPB will issue their final rule likely in July. And that rule would likely go into effect on September 1st. So you may ask, is there going to be a gap between the expiration of the federally backed foreclosure moratorium that expires at the end of June? And the answer is we don't know yet. We think that the government agencies are considering whether to extend that moratorium from the end of June to the end of August to kind of line up with what the CFPB is doing. But they also might not do that for a variety of reasons, in which case what you would see from an inventory perspective, it really wouldn't affect folks who are in a mortgage forbearance. Those can be extended, and nobody who's on a forbearance is likely to end up in a foreclosure, frankly, anytime this calendar year. For the people who never went into forbearance or people who were in foreclosure prior to COVID, you could imagine a situation where some of those homeowners start moving down that foreclosure pathway. There's so much equity out there right now that, again, we expect that most people who find themselves in an unsustainable situation are likely simply to sell. And that will really reduce the number of foreclosures out there. So from NCST's business model perspective, I don't think we have a near-term expectation of significantly more properties coming through. But if the moratoria expire, it does make it easier for the servicers to get more aggressive on putting vacant properties through. And that's where, that's where the inventory is that you all are most likely to buy. So, hopefully we'll start to see some uptick in that, possibly, late in the year or early in 2022. But, on that bigger scale of whether we're expecting a whole bunch of foreclosures anytime soon, the answer is no. The only other, I want to mention a couple of other things, specifically to mention for those of you who are following the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, as we all are. I want to say that we've actually added more co-sponsors in the Senate. Again, we're adding co-sponsors in a bipartisan way. And we are waiting to see the details of the president's budget, which we'll know about on May 27th, and particularly details on, what we're expecting is $213 billion in housing spending. And, that will include tax provisions, and we'll see what happens there. The last thing I'll mention is there is a new spate of interest across the policy spectrum, both in Congress and in regulatory agencies and executive agencies, concerning lumber prices. So I think everyone here will be well aware of where those prices have gone and how trade policy does affect what the pricing is there. And so we are beginning to see bills in Congress, as well as requests for the U.S. Trade Representative and others to try to address the price of lumber, which is significantly impacting the ability to increase the inventory for home ownership. I think I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Julia. Any folks have any questions or comments for Julia today? Or anything else to share about what you're seeing in your neighborhoods, especially around the increased costs of construction due to costs of lumber and other things? I know we're seeing that definitely here. Not seeing anything right now. I'll go ahead and move forward with announcements, and I'm happy to come back to questions at the end if folks have them. A couple of just heads up. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, the LISC Institute is presenting an interactive discussion on sustaining Black homeownership and generational wealth. Our own Julia Gordon will be moderating, and will be joined by Andre Perry, who's a senior fellow from the Brookings Institution, as well as Denise Scott and Dr. Irvin Pedro Cohen from LISC. So please mark your calendars for that and plan to attend. Should be a great discussion.
I should say about that, I think it may actually be full at this point, but
oh shoot. Well, check it out. Definitely check it out and see if you can get in. Then our next community impact briefing will be June 16th. We'll be joined by Ahmad Abu Khalaf, and he will be discussing affordable housing production and the use of ADUs. It does sound like just looking at comments and things here, it's certainly the LISC webinar is sold out. Shoot. A couple of quick things here. One, it looks like in some areas, the costs of building materials are making it impossible to build affordable housing, certainly an issue. One other question that came out here is around major appraisal issues. Carlos, I'm not sure if you are able to to talk right now. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you're able to give some additional information about what you're seeing from an appraisal issue, that would be great.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So on like 4 different occasions, I've some of these properties were NCST properties, others were for like clients, investor clients of mine. And in the last 4 instances, all the appraisals came back extremely low. We're talking $50,000 below value, $100,000 below value. Like it's not even like close at all. And the issues that I'm having is, we're going back to the appraisals, we're contesting it, we're trying to do what we can do with the lender, but the comps aren't catching up fast enough with the market. And then the cost of construction and the cost of labor, the appraisers are being, I guess, lack of a better, sorry about that. The appraisers are being like, reserved and conservative. So they're not taking any risks on trying to, include the increase of cost that we've encountered over the year and its impacting values in a major way.
So Carlos, unfortunately, this is actually a very big problem right now nationally. The market is insane. The home price appreciation rate is unprecedented. When you put it on a graph, it kind of goes straight up. And this is a regular topic of discussion in industry conversations because it's happening to everybody. It is likely worse for anybody working in neighborhoods that weren't previously super hot neighborhoods, because we're not used to that kind of home price appreciation. But this rush for inventory is affecting even those neighborhoods, and there's cash that's driving up prices, and of course the cash doesn't need an appraisal. And so it's really disadvantaging anybody who needs to get financing. And so the best thing I can say to you is this is recognized as a problem and people are talking about it. I can't tell you that there are any, that there are any silver bullets. I see Michael is, mentioning that feds are aware of the issue, which they are very aware of. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of values dropping. I think that there is a sense in the government right now that home prices are on a very unsustainable path, and that, something will need to slow it down. There will probably be an effort to slow it down in terms of mortgage rates, but unfortunately, and this is why this conversation is difficult at the national level, a lot of this is not being driven by mortgage availability per se, it's being driven by cash. And the cash flight to real estate isn't going to change until that cash has some better options out there. And that has to do with other sectors, not just the real estate sector. So, the upside for us, to the extent there is one, is one of the reasons that there's this immense support right now for something like the neighborhood homes program, is that there's a recognition that if we can't really control that demand side, that we have to lean as hard as we can on the supply side. And that's helpful for whether it's neighborhood homes or whether it's a subsidy program like Restoring Communities Left Behind, or whether it's programs that states and localities are coming out with. Now, localities are finding themselves with quite a bit of money right now, with all the different rescue programs that have sent money from the federal government out to the states. And so, I would definitely recommend everybody talking to your state housing agencies, seeing what money can be found out there to help with appraisal gaps. Maryland has started a program that's just like the neighborhood homes program, but not using the tax system. It's just a subsidy to cover an appraisal gap. So, there may be solutions like that out there. We need to push for those solutions, especially to protect the ability for home buyers who are coming in with financing to ever get a home ever again if they're in competition with cash buyers.
Thank you, Julia and Aaron. That was some great insight, and I agree. I think definitely at like the local, state, national level, there needs to be some sort of legislation that gets created to help bridge the gap. Because you're right, the issue is not really cash buyers because they're able to bridge the gap with cash. It's the middle and low income buyers that are using financing, specifically FHA, where the appraiser is even more conservative for various reasons.
Yeah, and FHA is aware of that, and I think it's definitely on FHA's agenda to be looking. I think there's two, FHA is looking at all of the aspects of its program that keep it from being used as much as possible. The same is also true, by the way, at VA and USDA. We know that VA mortgages also are sort of at the bottom of the list for what both buyers and sellers are interested in if they have the opportunity to choose among different financing options. And I think all those government agencies are pretty well aware of the problem. And I think what's hard now is that the COVID forbearances or the imminent expiration of the COVID forbearances is such a big elephant in the room. And FHA is not yet fully staffed up from the transition of administrations. They're having a little trouble on the walk and chew gum at the same time thing.
Understood. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great end to the discussion today. I'm not seeing any additional questions. We're almost at our time. I do want to encourage you again to attend next month's call on June 16th. Please watch for the registration link for that. And thank you so much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day.